Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 195. Less rhetoric, more sex. Ooh, what does this sentence mean? Yes, let's get into it. I am so excited for this particular podcast episode. I've been working on it for a little bit. I knew it was going to be coming soon. And I spent a lot of time with it, just diving into some of the concepts that we're going to discuss today. Had a lot of conversations with my husband about it, looked at it from a life coaching perspective. And for me, this is just fascinating. The thoughts that come to our mind, man, they are fascinating. What a wonderful thing to really be involved in is to really dive into our own thinking. Man, it is such an adventure. What a trip. So I've talked about this before, that sometimes when I'm working with clients, there are certain topics that seem to like come in waves where for some reason, I'll have maybe 6 clients that are all like showing up with the same thought or very similar thoughts. And I came across another wave recently. And so I was like, yes, perfect for the podcast. Okay, so let's dive into what this is. This is mainly with my male clients, the husbands. And I thought it would be super valuable to really point out here that I do work with a lot of husbands. And they are not shy to reach out and say, hey, I am struggling with this. Me and my wife, we're really struggling with intimacy. And we need some help. So this is the topic that has come up, is this topic of talk, conversations. And I actually had one client who used this exact phrase with me. He said, less rhetoric, more sex. And I was like, bring it on. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this thought. Because this is the thought that is running through his mind and it's wreaking all kinds of havoc. And this was happening for a lot of the other husbands I was working with. Very similar thought running through their mind. So it seems like they are really wanting to do less talking, right? They want to just get to the sex part. Shelly, we need help. Tell me how to get more sex, right? Let's just skip all the bull crap. Let's get to more sex. And there are many versions of this saying. A lot of them very explicit, some of them funny. A lot of versions of it. And I want to point out that with these husbands that I'm working with, they are coming from very different circumstances as far as frequency of sex goes, right? Some of them are having sex several times a week. Some of them are having sex once a week. Some are having sex once a month. Some are once every 4 months. There are a few that are having sex about once a year. And there are fewer that are having a sex life with their wife that is not even once a year. So I wanted to point out that even for the husbands who are having plenty of sex, they still have these thoughts. So frequency doesn't change these thoughts, because I think for most men, it's never going to be quite enough. That's the idea behind it, right? Because I have these husbands, they're like, yeah, we're pretty frequent, we're having sex 4 times a week. Let's get to more sex, right? And their wife might be thinking he's a sex addict. But then the husband's who's like, hey, I've only had sex once every 2 years. I would love to be in your shoes. And if I was in your shoes, I would never be wanting more sex. That's what we think, right? But I promise you, even the men who are having plenty of sex, they are still thinking there is more available to them. And how do we get to that? Let's not talk about it. Let's not have conversations. Let's skip all that and let's get to more sex. So I really wanted to point that out, that we think if we change our circumstances, right, and all of a sudden we're having a ton of sex, that we're no longer going to think this way, right? We're never going to have these negative thoughts. And it's just not true. Because I have husbands all over the spectrum with frequency, and most of them are thinking, let's get to more sex. So the challenge, part of the challenge is when we are having a thought like this, like less rhetoric, more sex. Let's just get to the part of the sex. We end up creating a situation, the husbands end up creating a situation for themselves where they become desperate for more sex. And then their actions are based in desperation. And then they do those actions that are usually negative, right? Because if you're desperate, you're probably going to be using critical language of your wife, or you're going to be criticizing her. You're going to be condescending. You're going to talk about her duty. And those actions that are negative, your attempts to get more sex, are probably the things that are making your wife go, oh, I don't like that. I don't want to have more sex with that. That just is desperate. It's creepy. It's needy. It's not manly. And the thing that you're trying so hard to do to get more sex, those very actions rooted in that type of thinking, is the challenge, is the problem. So we end up kind of using, the husbands end up using actions and approaches that end up perpetuating the cycle of wanting even more sex, and the wife going, I don't know about more of that. So their attempts are ineffective. And I want us to pay attention to this word, ineffective, right? They're not working. And sometimes the approaches that they're using, especially if they're using guilt and criticism, they're using approaches that will actually make their marriage worse, not lead to more sex. So we're going to need a better approach for sure. So the challenge becomes like, what happens when this type of thinking enters the arena, right? The more we think something like, hey, less talking, less of the foo-foo, less of the psychobabble, less of the emotional connection stuff, the more we have those thoughts, the more deeply it gets rooted in a husband's mind, right? It just becomes like a belief that just seems, how could we even challenge this belief? How could we change it? But the even bigger challenge is that this exact thought, this line of thinking, is skipping the most vital steps, the most critical steps in a woman's desire to be intimate. Right? When we think less rhetoric, more sex, it's like skip all the other stuff and let's just get right to the action of sex. If you know what the self-coaching model is, the action line of having sex, that's the fourth part, the fourth step out of 5. That means we're missing 3 steps before we get to sex. Husbands, do you know what those 3 steps are? Women, do you know what those steps are for yourself to actually create that desire within yourself to want to be intimate? When we're skipping over what we term fluff and psychobabble and just women's stuff, we're actually skipping her, a woman, getting turned on. We're skipping her arousal and then wondering why women don't want it. We actually need to make sure that is a part of the equation every single time. In fact, it deserves way more of both a husband and a wife's attention, because a husband's arousal is far more simple. A woman's arousal, her desire to be intimate, which leads to the arousal of her body, is much more sophisticated. It needs our time and attention. I want you to ask yourself, do you know the steps? What is the name of the system that you're using that says, if I follow this system, we will have a great and successful and satisfying sex life? What's the name of the system you are currently using? How many steps are in that system? What are the names of the steps? What's the order of the steps, the sequence? How much time are you supposed to spend in each step to lead to that successful sexual experience for both spouses? If you can't answer those questions and you don't know the name of the system you're using to approach sex and intimacy, you're probably not using a system at all, which means your attempts will be ineffective. Okay. So we don't want to remain here. This is not fun for either spouse, right? It is not enjoyable for a wife to continue having sex when there is no system in play that accounts for her desire and arousal. It's basically been eliminated. That is not a fun sexual experience for her. And it is not a fun sexual experience for a husband who keeps trying to have more sex that he enjoys, but that his wife doesn't. And he keeps getting frustrated when his attempts are not working, right? This is miserable for both spouses. So we need to make a shift. We need to stop using our old, ineffective approaches. We need a system. We need a system that works. We need a system that's effective. So another thing that happens when a husband is thinking along these lines, like less rhetoric, more sex, is that it creates an expectation of how things should be in the relationship and how things shouldn't be, right? Why should my wife want to have conversations? That's not even a part of sex. That's separate. It's its own thing, right? We have these shoulds and these shouldn'ts. So it becomes an expectation. And then if our expectations are not being met, we think something has gone terribly wrong in the relationship. And we start thinking negatively about our spouse because they're not meeting our expectation when it comes to sex. And for the wives, this is probably going to be on the opposite side, right? Like we're not having these deeper conversations. We're not having these emotional connections before sex, and we should be, because that is what a good sexual relationship should include and should look like. We have all these shoulds. And we also think, hey, I signed up for my expectation. Husbands might think I signed up for a lot of sex. That's one of the reasons I got married. And a wife might think, hey, I signed up for a deeper relationship. That also includes sex. And that's why I got married, not just for sex. So when a husband comes with this type of thinking to the relationship, and when it's dinner time, he's going to act on it, right? And if he's thinking less talk, less rhetoric, he's going to probably start talking less, having less conversations, and even becoming bored of conversations that may need to be happening, maybe just about scheduling or kids or whatever, plans for the weekend, date night, and may even become angry that conversations are taking place. Even if conversations are happening at a minimal, they could easily become very bothered and annoyed. Like, why do we even need to discuss this, right? When conversations and talking through things is just it's a normal part of a relationship, but we can really come to resent this. And then a husband will become more mad when his wife does talk. And then even he may become mad even if she says only 2 sentences the whole day. Then all of a sudden we even think those 2 sentences are too much. Even if the sentences are neutral and not condemning or not critical, the husband can still become mad and think they're irrelevant, right? So the more that a husband starts to take on this thought, a wife is going to start having her own thoughts too, and they are also going to be negative. And in fact, she is probably going to start to become very resistant to sex, and especially to more of it. Right? So this is going to become counterproductive. Counterproductive. The thing that the husband is trying to get is going to become harder to get. And the thing that the wife is trying to get, right? A more conversations, a deeper emotional connection. The more she only tries to talk to him about anything but sex, the less of the conversation, any conversation that's going to take place, right? Also counterproductive, ineffective. So when a husband is approaching his relationship with his wife with this mindset of less rhetoric, more sex, a wife is going to sense that agenda a mile away. And especially if he gets mad at 1 or 2 sentences that she says, all of a sudden she's going to be thinking, all he thinks about and all he cares about is sex. And the husband will probably be proving that to be correct. So if that's all she thinks he's interested in, she is obviously going to be avoiding sex even more and be even more resistant and rebellious about sex and about having it, right? Again, counterproductive. This type of thinking creates results that are the opposite of what we are actually seeking and hoping for. So what do we need to do, right? This is all a big mess. We need to think a new thought. And we need to think a better thought. And we need to think a thought that is actually effective. A thought that will help us take better actions, that will lead to the results that we are actually seeking. And so that means we're going to have to spend a little bit of time, a little bit of effort on choosing to think more effective thoughts on purpose. And then when these negative thoughts come up, these old familiar ones that we're used to, we can say, oh yeah, there's that thought. There's that thought that's been ineffective for me. It hasn't brought me the success I've been looking for. It's been counterproductive. That's that counterproductive thought. Okay, I see you. I see you in my brain. You're buzzing around in there. And now I'm going to kick you out. And I prepared for this. I thought of a new thought, and I'm going to think this one instead. I'm going to replace it. Okay, and I'll give you some ideas about that in a sec. So I wanted to just take 1 second or 1 minute to define rhetoric, because this is an actual quote that one of my male clients said to me, right? Less rhetoric, more sex. And I was like, let's talk about rhetoric, right? Rhetoric can be defined as the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing, especially the use of figures of speech or other compositional techniques. Rhetoric can also be defined as language designed to have a persuasive or impressive effect on its audience, but often regarded as lacking in sincerity or meaningful content. So a lot of times when people are using the word rhetoric, they can imply that that is not really that's not really sincere what they're saying. It's lacking the meaningfulness, right? It's often regarded that way. Rhetoric is also defined as, pay attention to this definition, skill. Skill in the effective use of speech. What? Rhetoric can be a communication skill. People often use the word rhetoric in a negative tone, but what if we started to say, hey, maybe in conversation, maybe in talk, maybe in talking with our spouse, we can approach it in a way that is effective, that actually, instead of being disregarded and counted as not having meaningful content, if we use skill in our speaking, we can make the conversation meaningful. And then it will totally have sincerity. It won't be lacking sincerity. It'll be full of sincerity. So we won't need to dismiss it. Rhetoric is defined as the insincere, grandiloquent, which means like lofty language. And I thought that was just so interesting, right? We can really assume that rhetoric is just something negative. It's just trying to convince people, but there's no meat behind it. It's just the fluff, right? So in essence, it's almost as if some husbands think like, skip the fluff, skip talking because it's fluff, and let's get to the sex because that's what has substance. That's what is meaningful. That's what matters. And again, when we only approach it that way, we are saying that the conversations are not meaningful when they are very meaningful for a woman's desire and arousal on a sexual level. It's vital. It is very meaningful for women. So if men are trying to hurry up and skip over the meaningful stuff for women, that's when they're going to start to figure out that their sex life is not so good. They're skipping steps. They're skipping steps. Their arousal does not have a lot of prerequisites. It's actually zero. So of course they're like, well, there are no steps. It's just sex. And women are like, no, there are prerequisites. Let's get those steps in. Women are craving those steps to be included. They are craving it. So what do we do with all this, right? What do we do with this information? I want the women listening to this to think about their talk about sex. How often are you having conversations with your husband about sex? Can you put a number on it? Have you ever had a conversation about sex? Have you had more than one? Have you had a conversation that was actually effective, that brought about good results? I have found that with my female clients, they have a big fear when it comes to talking to their husbands about sex. One, they are afraid to hurt their ego, right? To say, this isn't good. This sex right here, this is not good. Not enjoying it. They are afraid to hurt their husband's ego. So they just choose to keep that ego where it is and instead be silent and not have that conversation. Unfortunately, the ego is crushed either way, right? The husband's still not feeling good because the wife doesn't want him or the sex. So he's not feeling good about that. But the second thing that sometimes holds a woman back from talking about sex is that she feels like, okay, yeah, sex sucks right now and I don't like it. And if I talk to my husband about it, I'm just feeding the beast. And he's just going to want more of it. And I don't want more right now. Actually, I'm avoiding it. I want less. So they're afraid that talking about sex is going to feed the beast. And for men, they have a fear, right? This is why they have this thought like less rhetoric, like let's skip over the talking and the emotions and the feeling stuff. Let's skip over the fluff. They also fear talking about other stuff, right? Because they think, well, we have had other conversations and it didn't lead to sex. And they fear that if they only talk or if they start to talk about other things, then they will never talk about sex, right? Oh, I'm meeting her needs by talking about all these other things, and we're still never talking about sex, right? So both husbands and wives are holding back some of the rhetoric and talk that could really be beneficial and effective because we have these fears that if we talk, it's going to be ineffective. Isn't that interesting how that plays out? We're not having some of the talk and rhetoric that would actually be effective, right? We need some skills. We need some skills so that when we do talk, we are talking in a way that's actually effective. Husbands, one of the best ways that you can be effective in your skill of speaking to your wife on other topics, things other than sex, is join her team. If she's mad at Karen in the carpool, you join her. We hate Karen. Why does she do that? Who does she think she is? And her white Suburban and her Stanley. Move along, Karen. Right? Husbands, that is effective talk. That is effective talking about something that is not sex. And your wife is going to be like, yeah, he gets me. He supports me. I don't like Karen in the carpool. And he is on board with that. She's going to find that type of talk sexy. So I really want us to be able to open up our minds as to the value of talk, the sexiness of talk, the outcomes of effective talk, talking with skill, talking with meaningfulness. So for some ideas, I want to make sure that for the women, because I think the fear is a little bit stronger in the women to actually talk about sex. I want to give you a couple tips. Okay. One is do not criticize. If you are starting to get the courage and the bravery and the badassery to start talking about sex, to have that conversation, do not criticize. You can have wonderful, effective conversations about sex without criticism. Okay. Do not criticize. If you find that you want to start your sentences with like, you do this, you never do this, you always do this, that's not going to be effective. He will not actually hear your message. Okay. So try to spend some time crafting and composing sentences that are not critical. In fact, you could create sentences to communicate that are complementary. I'm going to give you an example of one that I composed recently. Right. And this addresses a real issue that one of my clients had, one of my female clients, right? When they were being intimate, straight out intercourse sex, the depth of penetration was physically hurting her, right? Like he was all the way in, touching the cervix, ramming up against the cervix, and she was in pain. It could be natural to go with a critical comment here, right? To try and get that to stop. But what if we approached it with a compliment first? What if this is a game changer? What if we were able to say something like this? Your penis is big. It is big. And I think I could really enjoy it like more if you went in 3/4 of the way, 3/4 of the depth instead of 100% of the depth of the vagina, right? Let's go in 3/4 of the way. I think I could really enjoy sex more if we did that. Okay, so here we are addressing a real issue, right? It's the penis is going in way too far. It's reaching the cervix. It's pounding on the cervix, the nerves in the cervix. They're not pleasurable nerves, and this is a painful experience for her. She's not enjoying that experience, right? But she doesn't have to be critical. She can be complimentary. Your penis is big. Pull it out just a little, right? And then it will be amazing. What a much more effective way to speak, to talk about something that is a challenge, right? That you haven't enjoyed. So instead of being critical, try to create sentences that have compliments in them. This is good. I would like more of this. What? Use I statements. Do not start sentences with the word you because they are most likely critical and mean and corrective and hey, you're doing it all wrong. I am wanting to have a new conversation about sex. I have struggled with talking about this. I have not been feeling comfortable being able to talk about sex in the past. I would like to try something new, right? These I statements, that's adult, that is ownership, that's not blame. And another tip would be to use the phrase, I would really love, right? If we want something to improve with intimacy, with arousal, creating desire, I would love to spend more time making out. My body would really love that. I would love to feel some more kisses on my neck. I think that could really put my body into arousal. I think maybe spending 5 minutes on that instead of like 5 seconds could really take my arousal level to the next level. And it could be more intense and my body could be more prepared for sex, right? So those 3 tips are ways that we can communicate and talk in a way that is more effective, more meaningful. And it's not bad. It's not critical. It's not condemning. Another way that we could do that is like, I would be willing to have more sex if we could figure out this thing, right? Let's just say dryness. What if a wife was able to say, I would be willing to have more sex if we could figure out how to combat my level of dryness, right? Okay, great. Let's get some different lubrications and let's test them out. Let's see which one we like. That is a way that we can communicate that is effective and it's not critical and it gives ideas, right? So I hope that those ideas will help, especially for women who are not used to talking about sex. They're not comfortable talking about it. They don't want to hurt their husband's ego. If you're able to communicate with those 3 guidelines, those tips, I think you will feel more confident in being able to move forward with communicating and communicating in a way that is effective. Okay. And remember, you can do this by complimenting your husband and by telling him his penis is big. He will probably listen to what you say afterwards if you're saying that, if you're speaking his language, right? We can say, I want to enjoy sex more. I really do. I want to enjoy sex more. I think my body needs this, right? Those are all really good ways to have effective communication. My husband and I had a conversation about sex this morning that lasted about well over an hour. I don't know, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And I want to really use this as an example of what happens because women have a big fear about this, right? Like if I talk to him about sex, I'm going to just be feeding the beast and he's going to want to have more. He's going to want to have sex right then. And I want to talk about this because this just happened with my husband and I. And I want to let you in on a secret, something that's mysterious. Because he did get aroused. I for sure fed that beast. But feeding the beast through conversation doesn't mean you have to actually act on it. Okay? Really listen to this. Husbands, I want you to listen to this because there is value in this. There is a level of confidence and experience and understanding that comes with starting to have these conversations. Okay. So I want to just focus in on some of the benefits of having conversations about sex. Start the conversation. If your wife, start the conversation about sex. I want to improve sex. You have a big penis. Let's work it out. Right? He will become aroused. He will become aroused. Okay. This is usually what happens. What do you do then? Right? That's the big fear, right? A lot of the women are like, but I'm not ready. I don't want to have sex right then, right? Well, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to keep having the conversation. Continue the conversation. What happens when you don't bow to his sex drive, his urge at that moment to be sexually fulfilled? What happens when you don't bow to that? When that sex drive kicks in and he becomes aroused and it does not become the master, what happens? Right? We're all assuming that we have to become master to that drive when it shows up. Well, what if we don't? What happens? Couple things that are very valuable. One, a wife learns that she can have conversations about sex and that her husband can get aroused and they don't have to obey that desire. That gives her confidence to have more conversations about improving sex. Yeah. Another benefit of doing that is a husband learns, hey, she's talking to me about sex. This is great. Yeah, I'm aroused. Yeah, I would love to have sex right now. That would be amazing. But I'm learning something very valuable. She's not in the mood right now. I'm in the mood, but she's not in the mood right now. But I'm learning. She's communicating how we can improve our sex life. And if we improve our sex life, hey, maybe she would actually want to have more of it. So then he learns to ride that out and also not be the slave to that urge, right? That he has a say in it. His wife has a say in it. She can ignite it, but he also has a say in it. And he can learn that, hey, I can ride that out. And in fact, if you know what Tantra is, that's a big part of it. Husbands, if you don't know what tantric sex is, start looking into it. It is about holding off. It is about the delay. It is about the buildup. And the results are amazing. If you don't think that's possible, you need to dive into tantric sex. And for the wives, if you don't know what tantric sex is, just know that holding off the urge and not being a slave to the master of the sex drive, right? That has its own set of pleasures and benefits. And you can even tell your husband that doesn't mean like more sex and go sex nuts. It means learn the value of riding the wave out. That's awesome. You're encouraging your husband to learn also about sex. This is beautiful. You guys will both be gaining knowledge, wisdom, skill, competence. As you are talking about the sexual aspect of your marriage, I want women to know that you are validating your husband by doing so. Even if you don't say, I validate you, just having a conversation with your spouse about sex says, hey, I acknowledge it. I acknowledge you. And I acknowledge that this is actually a part of our relationship. Maybe I haven't done that in the past, but I am going to start to acknowledge now that it is a part. It's not the whole part and it's not zero part. It is a part. It is one part of our marriage. And I think I'm ready to start paying a little more attention to that part now. This is awesome. And I want women to know this is, again, one of those mysteries. Your husband will love you and appreciate you for having this conversation. Yeah, he could be aroused, but he's learning also to write it out as you just keep continuing the conversation. You keep the conversation going and not obeying the urge, not obeying his arousal in that moment. Just keep the conversation going. And I want to invite each wife to really pay close attention if your husband does this, if he does get aroused and then you just don't obey that urge and you just keep the conversation going, to be impressed by that and to be appreciative of that and to really allow your brain to say, he's doing it. He's writing that out. That's amazing. That's an amazing place to have that moment of being impressed, being intrigued by it, being appreciative and grateful that he is also putting forth an effort. Just having conversations about sex and allowing those conversations, starting those conversations from the wife is going to also allow your husband to be more open to real conversations about other things as well in the relationship with your family, right? All the other things, all the other conversations you want to be having. Start with sex. Start talking about sex and watch how many of the doors open to talk about other things, to talk about the emotions, to talk about the emotional connections. Husbands are willing to do a lot of talking about a lot of things and are willing to change and improve when we at least acknowledge and address the sexual aspect of the relationship. Are we, as the wife, tuning into that and capturing that? That's powerful stuff. When a wife is able to talk about sex with her husband, even if it's uncomfortable and awkward and we're not sure how to talk about this, we are starting to invite a new level of collaboration and harmony into the relationship that probably hasn't existed before, right? We're not talking about it. We're going to pretend this isn't an issue. We're going to pretend it doesn't exist. We invite newness. We invite collaboration. We invite brainstorming. Ooh, those are sexy things, right? We don't think about it as sexy, but they are. When my husband is like, hey, we need to schedule a few things out. Like, let's look at our schedule. I'm like, game on. I'm turned on. When he wants to schedule things, I am aroused. Right? Are we talking about sex? No, we're talking about scheduling. Right? When my husband can talk about other things that are not sex, I become interested in sex. You want to schedule things? So we make sure that we're taking care of all of our kids' activities and dates and things that need to be, the errands that need to take place. You want to schedule those things? Hell yeah, let's schedule them. It's sexy. And I don't know if women really know that and can tap into that. But when we are able to talk about sex, men are able to start talking about the other things. And maybe they will start initiating those other conversations that we long to have with them. When we're able to start having more effective conversations about sex with our husband, and we're able to start with, hey, your penis is big and I would love to enjoy sex more. Let's see if we can figure out this one thing together. This type of conversation and effective talking lowers the objectification of women and you as a wife in particular, right? Because you are now teaching your husband, hey, this one thing hasn't been working. Let's work on it. He appreciates the conversation. He appreciates the no criticism. He appreciates the compliment. And so he is willing. He is willing to take what you are saying into deep consideration and to think about it and to make the change, make that adjustment. Yeah, you are lowering maybe whatever level of objectification he may have been experiencing that. He may have been experienced. Do we realize, women, that we can lower that ourselves by having conversations about sex? That is empowering. These are mysteries that we don't know can take place. They are available to us, right? And husbands are going to appreciate this. They want to be connected to their wives in more way than one, but they also don't want the sexual way to be ignored. As we are able to have more conversations with our husband and really communicate effectively, and as we lower his maybe objectification of us, we also lower our objectification of him, right? All of a sudden, he is making an adjustment. And you're like, hey, he listened to me. It's not just about the penis calling the shots. That's awesome. I appreciate that. So it really helps the thought process for both spouses when we are able to have conversations about sex. This is the topic that most couples avoid, right? When they come to me, so many couples are like, we never talk about it. We just can't. We don't know how. We just have never talked about it for 30 years. I want to really offer to you, hey, if you can talk about sex, you're going to be able to talk about anything in your relationship. Learning how to talk about the hardest aspect of your marriage, one of the hardest aspects, is going to give you the skills and the tools to be able to talk about all the other aspects as well. This is a win-win. When you really have to think about how you're structuring your sentences so that they do complement, so that they don't criticize, that's building skill. You can do that with the other aspects of your relationship and your marriage as well. So learning to talk about sex is a skill that will help you talk about all the aspects of your relationship, your life, your family, all of it. That is awesome. When a wife is able to start talking about sex, a husband will also be more willing to talk about all the other things, even spiritual things. What? Sometimes we want our husbands to be more spiritual. Okay, if we want them to be more spiritual, we need to start talking about sex a little bit more too. If they're just like, I'm never getting sex, we're never having sex, like that's going to take up a lot of his brain space. Like there's not a lot of room there for him to want to talk about spiritual things because he feels so desperate for sex. Ease his worry. Talk about it. Because when you talk about it and there's a conversation, all of a sudden that's not going to be taking up all of his brain space. He's like, oh, we talked about this. I'm not thinking about it anymore. Now I can think about other things and discuss them. It's awesome. I also want to point out that during these conversations, right? During these conversations about sex, and he gets aroused and doesn't act on it, right? We just keep the conversation going. He learns to ride that urge out, and he is also learning to bridle that passion. He's channeling it because you're having a conversation, and now the wife is giving some insight into which direction to channel that energy, and she can show him where to channel his sexual energy, right? Not just sex in and of itself, but channel that sexual energy into going 3/4 of the way in. That's the focus, right? That's how you channel it. That's how you bridle it. So she can also be involved in taking the reins, right? She can take the reins a bit within this process through communicating. I mean, this is awesome. This is amazing stuff. So if women feel like, oh, he's just going to be turned on, he's going to be aroused, and then he's going to go sex nuts, right? By not obeying that urge, you guys are both learning about the bridling, the channeling, right? These spiritual topics as well that connect with the sexual. And one of the biggest mysteries for both the wife and the husband is that during these conversations, during this process, during this experience of talking about sex and not obeying the urge, men will also be learning the value that the quality that will come to the sexual experience will outweigh the quantity of sexual experiences. What? Yeah. This is what happens. But this is what women don't know what will happen, and husbands don't know that this will happen either. This is a mystery. This is a mystery. Husbands will start to really appreciate quality because he will see that through these conversations, through these adjustments in the sexual experience for the wife, that the quality improves. And he's like, I want more of that too. My wife has said, make this adjustment. I'm making it. And this is way better. And she is enjoying it. Whereas before she was like the dead fish, right? He will come to appreciate the quality, the value of the quality, not just the quantity of sex. It's awesome. Conversations about sex lead to so many amazing things. Yeah, they're awkward at first, but so was walking for the first time. So was learning to read. So was riding a bike. So was writing an essay for the first time, right? Or going to school. So many things are challenging and difficult and uncomfortable and awkward at the beginning, but it doesn't mean we're supposed to stop. We're supposed to go through that. Go through it to understand the value of what it means to come out on the other side. It's usually a beautiful experience, and the benefits are endless. Talking about sex, yes, it feeds the beast, but it doesn't mean we're going to become sex addicts just by talking about it. Like, this does not happen. I've never seen this happen with any of my clients, right? They start talking about it. All of a sudden, there are two different people who just can't stop having sex. Like, it just never happens. This fear that women have that, like, hey, if we talk about it, he's just going to want it nonstop and it's just going to make things worse. Like, it's not really happening. Okay. Put that fear to rest. That's not the experience. That's not the result. Sex improves. Yeah, you want it a little bit more. And that's okay because it's actually sex that's better. Do you want it a million times more? No. Do you want it a little bit more? Yeah. Do you want it maybe a little more than a little more? Yeah. And you can continue to have these conversations about sex so that it can continue to improve. But you won't be so resistant, right? If you're only having sex once a month and it sucks, you don't ever want any more of that. But if you have, let's say you have a conversation about sex and then sex improves, well, if you have sex twice a month, but it's better, things have not gotten worse just because the frequency went up, because the sex is actually more enjoyable. What? It's a win-win. The frequency goes up, so the husband likes that, but the quality goes up, so the woman likes that. We need to have more effective conversations about sex. Yes, we do. I also want to point out that during these conversations, when a wife is willing to start having more conversations about sex, you are giving your husband a gift that you wish he already had. But he doesn't yet. He doesn't know how awesome it is to experience emotional intimacy. You talking to him about sex gives him that. And then he goes, wait a minute, now I get what she's talking about. This is actually awesome. To have an intellectual conversation, to feel good about the conversation. That is emotional intimacy. That's what she's been asking me for all these years. And I just thought it was the rhetoric, the fluff. Wait a minute. I'm actually having an experience with it. And it's freaking awesome. Women, this is an amazing thing. Our husbands don't always understand this yet, right? We're very different creatures. We're two different people. But we can give him insight. We can give him an experience of emotional connection, emotional intimacy by having conversations about sex. He will start to also appreciate and want to include more emotional connection. What? That's a result? Hell yeah, it is. And that is an amazing thing to experience. And I really want to also point out that when he gets to experience you talking about sex and he connects to it, that's real because he's not looking at porn. He's not looking at nudity. He's connecting to you. That is powerful stuff. As we get to the end of this episode, I want to point out that a lot of times for women, we want our husband to be faithful to us. And yet we don't want to have sex with him. Right? Because so far sex has been sucking. So let's start to have more conversations about sex so we can actually improve things. And then there will be less unfaithfulness out there, right? Let's revel in the rhetoric. Let's bask in it. Let's take baths in it. Let's immerse ourselves in the rhetoric, right? In the words, in the sentence structures, in speaking in ways that are effective and beneficial and very important, meaningful, right? This is not about fluff. This is about things that are very meaningful. So as we conclude, this is all part of the mystery of marriage. This is all fun. This is adventurous, right? If we look at it that way. Husbands, I want you to really think about this. Instead of less rhetoric, more sex, let's try a new mantra, right? How about more meaningful talk, more meaningful sex? Maybe more talk is what leads to more sex, right? When men can talk about other things, maybe that is what leads to more sex. Not saying no talk, but start talking about things that are meaningful to your wife. That is the key that unlocks the doors. Now, women, right? We think talking about sex feeds the beast. We need a new thought too. We need to start thinking this. Talking about sex tames the beast. It tames it. It channels it. It reins it in. It controls which direction that sexual drive and energy is going. Let's channel it to the area of improving things, making those minor adjustments that make sex better, not just this random category of sex in general, but let's tame that. Let's take the reins and show our husbands which way to guide that sexual energy. That's amazing. That is amazing. So talking about sex tames the beast, not just feeds the beast, tames the beast. Sex will improve, communication will improve, your feelings about one another and about sex will improve, and the relationship will improve. Yes, this is what we want. Okay. If you're struggling with any of this, please get on my website, shelly.andersoncoaching.com, and sign up for a free discovery session. Yes, I can help you with trying to start a conversation about sex or how to have one in a way that's effective, right? That's what we need. Please sign up. It is free. You get me for 1 hour for free. It's awesome. It is awesome. Sign up for a free discovery session and let's start improving things today. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me again next week.